Hello, my name is Dubs Weinblatt. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm the Associate Director of Education and Training of Metro New York for Keshet. I am thrilled to be the host of Keshet's new virtual series, Joy and Resilience, Jewish LGBTQ Leaders on What Sustains Us. As LGBTQ Jewish people, oftentimes we need to create our own ways of persevering through tough moments. Surviving and thriving in this world has pushed us to create our own story of unique wisdom about resilience, joy, and community. Each week, our team will invite a different Jewish LGBTQ community leader to join us in a thoughtful conversation about what sustains us and keeps us hopeful. With me today is my colleague, Emily Saltzman, who will introduce our first guest.
Hi, everybody. As Dubs mentioned, I'm Emily Saltzman, I use she and her, and I'm the Associate Director of Education and Training here at Keshet. We are so thrilled to have Eric Marcus join us today, and I have the honor of telling you a little bit more about him. Eric Marcus is the founder and host of the award-winning Making Gay History podcast, which mines his decades-old audio archive of rare interviews conducted for his oral history book of the same name about the LGBTQ civil rights movement to create intimate, personal portraits of both known and long-forgotten champions, heroes, and witnesses to history. His other books include Is It a Choice?, Why Suicide, and Breaking the Surface, the #1 New York Times best-selling autobiography of Olympic diving champion Greg Louganis. Eric is also co-producer of Those Who Were There, a podcast drawn from Yale University's Fortunoff video archive for Holocaust Testimonies. And he is the founder and chair of the Stonewall 50 Consortium, an organization that brings together 235 nonprofit institutions and organizations committed to producing programming, exhibitions, and educational materials related to LGBTQ history and culture. Wow. So much you've done. It's so thrilling to have you here today. And now for today's conversation, we're going to start with a Q&A with Eric, and then he'll be sharing with us some clips from his audio archive. And what a treat. And so welcome again, Eric. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you,
as Dubs mentioned, yes, thank you so much.
After hearing that introduction, I think, and what do I do in my spare time?
I'm sure plenty. So as Dubs mentioned earlier, our conversation series is about joy and resilience. So please tell us, what do these words mean to you and how do they intersect?
Well, I'm so tempted to look around my office for joy because I don't know if anyone who knows me well would describe me as the most joyous person. I tend to have a bit of a dark streak. One of my books is called Expect the Worst, You Won't Be Disappointed. It's a book of pessimistic humor. So I guess I do find joy in humor. That book is a collection of quotes, pessimistic but humorous quotes, organized by subject. And I introduce each chapter with an essay about my late grandma Ethel, who is one of the world's great pessimists. But I can tell you, there was much joy whenever my grandma Ethel and grandpa Louis walked through the door of our apartment in Kew Gardens, Queens, carrying a stack of boxes of cakes and bread from the J.D. Bakery on Queens Boulevard in Kew Gardens. And the newspapers in my grandfather's arm, and he always had an unlit cigar in his mouth. And their joy in seeing us was so inspiring to me that I experienced joy myself in their presence. It's so interesting, so much of the joy that I've experienced in my life has been in relation to my grandparents, both sides of my family, and seeing with them, and seeing them, being with them, experiencing their joy of being with us. And then for me, the joy of being an uncle. I love and have loved being an uncle to my 2 nephews and niece, my brother's 2 kids and my sister's daughter. You asked about resilience also, and I've been thinking about this idea of resilience, and in my own life, whether it's something innate, does it have anything to do with my Jewishness, or is it something that's part of us as humans? And I was reminded of a conversation I had with one of my cousins quite a few years ago when he was a freshman in college. and he was asked to write an essay about some challenge he experienced in his life. And at that stage of life, I think I might have thought of myself as resilient by the time I was in college. I'd been through some really searing experiences. My father's suicide, for one, when I was 12. And my cousin said he didn't know what to write about because he couldn't think of any challenge that he'd had in his life. And
Wow.
I don't know if we become resilient unless we've been tested. That we as humans are programmed genetically, or however we're built, to be resilient in the face of challenges, because as humans over the centuries, we've always faced challenges. And as Jews, we've probably had more than our fair share. So from my own experiences, I've learned resilience, but also the stories of my grandparents and their trip to America. One of my grandmothers came with her mother and two sisters, and one of the sisters died on the way here. And then my grandmother, who was 6, spent 3 weeks or 6 weeks in quarantine on Ellis Island because she had diphtheria or scarlet fever. So in hearing their stories, I learned about what it meant to be resilient, which is, I think, simply going forward, ideally with greater strength and a sense of perspective, having learned something from what you've been through. So it's so interesting that this question brings me to my grandparents, to my ancestors, and both the joy that I experienced with them and the resilience that I saw in them that inspired me.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk through that, as you know, reading some of the things that you've written and talking with you, having conversations about our ancestors and chosen family and chosen ancestors and people that we're connected to by path, not necessarily by blood, and something that you do so powerfully in your work, and that it's so incredibly important that we have written record of this, that we have audio record, that it really changes our way of connecting to the past and what even does our future look like. So like this thread of how could we envision our future if we can't see our past, but now we can connect to our past.
Yes, it's so true. And I often say this, that we can't know where we're going unless we know where we've been. And in terms of my LGBTQ work, there is example after example of enormous resilience. I interviewed more than 100 people for the 2 editions of the book. And people got knocked down over and over again, and they came back, often stronger. Some people got crushed along the way. And were really so deeply wounded by their experiences that they retreated. But then I'm thinking of Morris Foote, a guy in Idaho I interviewed who fled Boise in 1955 during the Boys of Boise scandal, the homosexual panic. And at the time I interviewed him, he hadn't been back to Boise since 1955. He fled to a small town he was from. This was in the late 80s when I interviewed him. But then it was 1990, he got involved in the gay community, the organized gay community, and was at the first Pride celebration in Boise, Idaho. And there's this wonderful photograph of him, he's well into his 60s, standing holding the rainbow flag in front of the state capitol. So that's just one example of so many people I met. Either they were gay bashed, or their best friend was killed, or their parents rejected them, and they came back, and they believed enough in themselves to move forward. And now for younger people who listen to the Making Gay History podcast, hear these stories, there are examples of resilience for them to look at, but also examples of joy, the joy that people took in the fight. I think of Barbara Giddings and Kayla Husen, who I think of as the happy warriors of the movement. They brought joy to the fight, even though they had every reason to think they were never going to succeed with the goals that they set for themselves.
Definitely, that joy piece is so important.
Yes.
I'm thinking back to our conversation that we had on the Thank You for Coming Out podcast. And one of the things that I had asked you then was like, what are the common themes that keep popping up among all of your interviews? And what you said to me was people not wanting to be forgotten and their legacy, you know, moving forward. And so I'm curious, and if like, and you kind of already touched on it a little bit, but wondering how the ideas and the importance of keeping these stories alive works together with resilience and joy. And like, if you have like specific examples of what, you know, of what that looks like or what that means, especially when in interviewing these people and what they're saying to you.
You're right that so many of the people I interviewed felt their stories wouldn't be remembered, that their contributions to the movement wouldn't be remembered because they put their hearts and souls and risked their lives, often their livelihood, to do what they did to make the world a better place so that the next generation wouldn't have to suffer in the ways that they did. And I had those thoughts when I was initially doing my work. I remember when I wrote the male couple, not the male couples guide, Is It a Choice? Questions and Answers about Gay and Lesbian People. This was when we were still the G and L movement, not the GLB or the GLBT, GLBTQ plus, that I wrote the book that I wished had been on the shelves when I was young so that the next generation wouldn't have to experience what I did, of feeling so alone, feeling so isolated, feeling so confused, and feeling so bad about myself. And that was something that was expressed to me over and over again by people who were involved in the movement in the 1950s. They didn't want others to suffer in the way that they did. So that you can teach resilience by example. But I do think that you have to go through the fire to come out the other side stronger. You can't just be taught it. And I used to be very envious of some of my family members, my extended family, who had these really privileged growing up experiences. But then when adversity hit them later in life, they were floored. They just had their legs kicked out from under them. And I saw the value of having been tested early, although I don't recommend having a parent kill themselves when you're 12 years old. That's a
No.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting when you're talking about the, like this being tested. And I've been thinking about this a lot too. Like, how do you define queerness, or like who can claim being part of the LGBTQ community? Like when we talk about this education and terminology, we really frame it as like who we're attracted to, like who we're in relationships with. But there's also all of this other community culture and experience. And I've talked with my friends about this too, that it feels sad to say, oh, part of identifying and claiming the identity queer is that you have to have experienced homophobia or transphobia or afraid that, you know, you're going to be, that you're looked at differently, or you've been attacked for, you know, being with a partner. And I wonder, like, is that ever going to go away? Like, is that going to eventually not be part of our identities? Like that testing that you're talking about?
Well, I think that the people I interviewed who were involved in the movement in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, their hope was that we would not in future generations be tested in that way. There are other tests in life. There are all kinds of tests that we experience, but that they wished for a world where our identity as LGBTQ people, or however we define our gender, that would not be part of the lesson plan, the resilience lesson plan that we all have. We have enough already in life. Whether you're short, which I was in junior high school, I was the second shortest in my class, and you get teased a lot for that, or because you wear glasses, which I did from an early age. You know, leaving aside being gay, I had all kinds of other stuff. But you pile on the sexual orientation and the stigma that went along with that, especially when I was growing up. It's a lot for a child or an adult to bear. Yeah. I hear from a lot of people who listen to our podcast now who have these really challenging experiences, even today as gay people. And I don't think, I mean, there's value in overcoming that, and you learn lessons from it. But I like to think there'll be a world where we can call ourselves whatever we want, whether it's queer, gay, lesbian, trans, however. but that doesn't, but that we're denied that, that label, embracing that label, unless we have been subjected and experienced discrimination or homophobia or transphobia.
Yeah, I feel like there's this like notion of, am I enough? That comes up a lot of like, am I queer enough? Am I trans enough? Am I Jewish enough?
Right.
And I feel like
No,
that.
not. You'll never be.
None of the above.
You just won't get there.
I had some of that because this is how I present, and I actually worked very hard at presenting not gay. That was part of my own issue, that I wasn't gay enough. Because one of my boyfriends, for example, in college, he used to say, well, I never have to tell anyone I'm gay. They just know. And I would want to say, well, Rick, they knew because they could tell from 6 miles away because you embody all of the stereotypes that people associate with homosexual men. But he really resented me because I wasn't gay enough. Just as people said about Pete Buttigieg, that he wasn't gay enough, without accepting that he's one kind of gay person, and we represent this extraordinary spectrum of humanity, from hyper feminine to hyper masculine, everything in between, whether we're biologically male or biologically female, we're everything. Yeah, so I hope I'm gay enough, but you know, once you get to be a certain age, and I'm not at a certain age, my partner and I can walk down the street arm in arm. They just think we're a couple of old guys helping each other across the street.
That's really sweet. That's very tender.
He has white hair, so it's, you know, once I was on the street, I was on Broadway in Manhattan on this was 79th Street. This is maybe 15 years ago, when you didn't see two guys holding hands. And I saw these two guys next to me around the same age, and they were probably in their 30s, and they were holding hands. And I turned to them and said, it's so nice to see two guys holding hands. And then I realized that they were in fact brothers. One was clearly impaired, and I wanted to die because I made an assumption that they were gay, just as some people make assumptions that my partner and I are brothers. And I realized that I made them uncomfortable, and there was no recovering from it. I just wished them a good day and kept walking.
Had to walk away.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's an important just story to hear, because it's like, I don't know if this is, stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but like craving to see visibility, and like craving that we are looking everywhere we can, and our minds, you know, make assumptions because we're seeing what we want to see, because we're not seeing it anywhere else, especially, you know, X years ago. So that's like, that's significant. Yeah.
Or girls holding hands, unless they were mother-daughter, but not brother mentally impaired brother, brother mentally impaired brother. I still think of that, and that feeling I had just of so mortified. But you're right, I craved seeing that. I would never do that. Even to this day, my partner and I would never hold hands on the street in New York. Never.
Wow.
It doesn't feel safe. And also we're accustomed to never doing that.
Yeah, I found that I lived in New York City for many years, and I found myself feeling much freer when I lived there in Brooklyn, and feeling very open to that, and friends from other parts of the country coming to visit and just being shocked that you did see that visibility. And at the same time, you know, there are still hate crimes. There are still folks who experience gay bashing. There are still folks that are threatened with their lives. And it's a hard coin to toss, because New York has this wonderful, like eclectic vision that we have all these different types of folks, and yet there's still fear, and yet there's still reality, and yet still folks aren't safe everywhere. So it's a challenging place, and other parts of the country have their own dichotomies that they're dealing with, and it's a strange time, especially now too, with what's going on in our world.
I can say, as a Jew in New York, and I don't wear a yarmulke, so I'm not as easily identifiable as a Jew. I never experienced anything here that makes me feel like I'm a Jew. because almost everybody is, or if they're not, they seem Jewish to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Jewish city, but when I go to visit my in-law family in Milwaukee, it's a huge family. It's a huge extended family. And there are all kinds of people in the family now, but I am the only Jew.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I feel that identity strongly.
Yeah. My partner is, they're not religious of any kind, but they're not Jewish. And I'm the only Jewish person in their family. And I feel it very hard when I visit them in Oregon. It's, oh wow, okay, this is happening. All right. What should we talk about today? Or like, what am I noticing in my body, even in those moments?
I'm wondering for both of you, when you're in those moments of feeling like the only Jew in a space, do you feel any kind of like skills you've learned of resilience of being a queer person that maybe would overlap in those moments? You're like, oh, I've experienced something similar to this as a queer person, and how does that translate into like this kind of like scenario?
That's a really good question, Doves. I can't say that I've ever thought about it in that way, but I've been in plenty of situations where I'm the only gay person. And then I'm hyper conscious of my behavior and that I represent a community. And because of my work, especially in the early days, 30 years ago, I would get asked questions as if I was a representative of the entire gay community. So when I spend time with in-law family, especially the older generation, I am a representative of the Jewish community. You know, I'm a representative of one slice. I'm a representative of myself, really. So often, I once gave a talk at Vassar College on what it was like coming from the planet of the homosexuals, because often in the early years of my work, I felt like I was a visitor from another planet, and that I was bringing news of these people, these strange people, to Earthlings.
Yeah.
You know, who were we? What did we do? Where did we come from? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I grew up in Minneapolis, and that's where I live now, and I feel like the opposite for me was true, that I was the only Jew more often, and so growing up, and then so the experience of being the other was very much from that perspective, and then coming out and being in spaces where I was the only queer person, and then the only queer Jewish person kind of adds this other layer of experience. And I think I typically use humor or try to make jokes about it, or like, oh, you know, it's just a Jew thing, even if it's not a Jew thing, or it's a, you know, like just trying to feel, not people feel bad, they don't understand, but also as an educator, that there is this educator role that sort of starts to happen, whether you like it or not, that folks are asking questions and they are just trying to do their best, and they want to understand and not want to offend anyone. And so there is this moment of, okay, I guess I have to do my best of explaining this, and you know what, they're not going to know it if I give the wrong answer because they're asking me. So I guess it kind of make things up as I go along, or speak from my own experience. But it's a unique moment for sure.
And Dubs, I know from your experience, you're now on the front lines of trying to explain who you are, how you can be who you are, to a world that does not quite understand gender identity yet in the way that many people do understand sexual orientation.
Yeah, and it does put me in a challenging situation too. Is it's like, you know, I can talk about my own experience, and that's different than someone else's experience, and trying to bridge the gap of knowledge, and you know, and then also be patient, and also answer questions that are very personal. That's something that, you know, our education team at Keshet is working on all the time, trying to figure out like the best ways to, you know, keep our boundaries, but also teach and, you know, use ourselves. And like Emily said earlier, it's a hard coin to toss, because it's, you know, I mean, especially in the scenarios in which I'm actually facilitating and I'm supposed to be an educator. it's tough. But something that you said earlier really resonated with me, both in my professional work and my personal outside of work, which is leading by example and teaching resilience by example, and simply just existing in a space. All of us as Jews, as queer people, as queer Jews, we are creating space for other people to bring their full selves to spaces. So
yeah, so shall we meet some of the wonderful people I got the chance to meet and hear from them?
Eric, right on cue. Yes, that's perfect.
Well,
It's like you planned it.
maybe. One of my favorite people who I interviewed, who actually was quite a challenging interview because he's a challenging guy, but somebody who was knocked flat on his back, fired from his job at the Army Map Service in 1957. He was an astronomer, and could not get another job because he was gay. It was a federal job. It was at a time when thousands of gay people were fired from their federal jobs because President Eisenhower had signed an executive order in 1953 banning gay people from federal employment. And Frank found a way of coming back. So I thought we would have a listen to Frank. And so this is a mini PowerPoint, and viewers will see an image first of the person we're talking about, and then we'll play the audio. So let's have a look at Frank Kameny, who's first up of the people I'm sharing today.
Wonderful.
Great.
Okay, there. So that's Frank Kameny when he was very young. When he was, I'm not sure, he was an undated photo. It's very hard to find early photos of Frank. But let's listen to what Frank had to say. This is just a short clip, about 2 minutes.
What the government essentially did is they turned an intellectual bookish astronomer into a radical.
Thank you for using that word. I have had cases over the years that I've handled of meek, mild, unassertive, unaggressive people who just want to go about doing their work, and suddenly they are hit hard, they are trampled upon with the hobnailed boots, and suddenly it does exactly that. It radicalizes them, and off they go marching militantly, and case after case after case. So anyway,
so by 61 you had become radicalized.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. So anyway,
oh boy, they didn't know what they were doing.
So we founded the organization, and now the movement of those days, and I say this next, not critically and not necessarily derogatorily, because it was a very, very, very different era. And we were sick, we were sinners, we were perverts. You have your long litany of pejoratives. There was absolutely nothing whatsoever which anybody heard at any time, anywhere at all, which was other than negative. Nothing. And so the movement, predictably, in retrospect, responded accordingly, and that was the nature of the movement.
So people were frightened, they had good reason to be.
Well, I was not only frightened, it was simply a lack of intellectual strength. We had to defer to the experts.
Oh, you hated that, didn't you?
My answer was, we are the experts on ourselves, and we will tell the experts they have nothing to tell us.
Yes. So that was Frank Kameny. He was a powerhouse, and went on to fight for 14 years to get the government to change its regulations regarding gay people, employment of gay people in federal jobs. There's a wonderful picture on our website at makinggayhistory.com of Frank Kameny at the White House shaking President Obama's hand when President Obama signed an executive order granting same-sex couples benefits, federal employees who were same-sex couples partner benefits. And to see Frank in the House after all of that, and Frank led some of the first protests in front of the White House in 1965. So Frank, to me, is an example of unusual resilience, someone who never gave up. he really believed in himself. It was also a very challenging interview because he was like a steamroller. No matter what I said, he just kept going.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. So the second person I want to share with you is Dear Abby. Now, Dear Abby is an example of somebody who used her position to come to the aid of a group that needed her support. So in this clip that you hear, Abby is responding to a column I read her that she wrote, a column that she wrote in response to a letter that she got from someone complaining about some people who had moved in next door who from the letter they'd written were clearly gay. So let's listen. Oh, so people may not know who Abby is. For younger folks, you won't know who she is. Think of Ellen DeGeneres, Oprah Winfrey, and every social media influencer you know who you respect and follow, rolled up into one. That was Abby. Everybody read Abby in the newspaper. She was read by millions of people every day all over the world in her column. If you had a problem, you wrote to her or her twin sister, Ann Landers. You can imagine what that relationship was like. They both had college and both Jewish. And so I got to interview Abby. It was like interviewing the biggest celebrity, like interviewing Madonna, which to me was different, but
That's
that was
amazing.
the experience. So this is Abby responding to me reading that letter to her about the couple, people who moved in who might be gay. So let's hear that.
There was a column that you wrote. This is the woman who complained about the new neighbors next door, a strange man, the couple.
Well, the letter was, this is a nice neighborhood, and we're very disgusted with these types. And what could we do to improve the neighborhood? And my answer was, you could move. The gays thought it was hilarious. But other than just being amusing, entertaining, there was a good message there.
Which was?
Which was they have a right to be. If you don't like it, you could move. Because they have as much the right to be them as you have to be yourself.
Mm-hmm. How much of an impact do you think you've had as one person on this issue?
I think I was I was one of the first person on the national level that wasn't gay. I wasn't defending myself. I was defending everyone's right to be themselves, gay, straight, no matter.
And that was in the beginning of the 1950s.
It took, people tell me it took a lot of guts, but I was happy to have a platform such as I had.
One of the things I loved about Abby is that she didn't let people stop her. She got bags of hate mail over gay stuff, and she got bigger bags of hate mail over the issue of reproductive rights. And she said she quoted a note she got. She often got notes from people saying, I'm going to pray for you. I hope you're a good Christian woman. And her response always was, I hope I'm a good Jewish woman, which probably made people more crazy. Actually, I only experienced all the years I've been doing this work, I only had one person comment on the fact I was Jewish. You know, I had on call-in shows, people would call and call me a fag or say all kinds of horrible things. But one person I guess I was talking about not being a particularly religious person. And one person called up and said, the reason you don't believe in the Bible is because you're Jewish. And they said Jewish as if it were a curse word. I thought, that is a really strange thing to say.
Yeah.
And quickly moved on. And what he was saying was, because I'm Jewish, I couldn't possibly believe in the Bible or God. Anyway, Abby is one of my favorites. I remain friends with her daughter, Jeannie Phillips, who still does the column.
Wonderful.
Amazing.
Yeah. So next up is another favorite, Morty Manford. Morty and his mom, Jean Manford, co-founded PFLAG, Parents, Friends, and Families of Lesbians and Gays. And you can see Morty was a kid in this picture, and that's when he got involved in the movement in 1970. And he became president of an organization called the Gay Activist Alliance and led all kinds of protests. And this clip is well, I'll let Morty explain. So why don't we play the clip and then I'll tell you about it.
Somehow or another, I got inside. I mean,
all by yourself? And you were the only one to get in?
Yeah. What, maybe 1,000 people sitting in the audience, and the mayor was up at the podium talking. Well, there I was. What was I going to do? It was just me. So naturally, I did what anyone else would do. I walked onto the stage and I took the podium away from John Lindsay. I walked up right next to him, and I said, so the audience could hear, the police are brutalizing gay people 3 blocks away from where we're sitting. Oh, the police harassment and attacks were even going on that night. That was one of the points that I made. I wasn't there very long, but what I said made an impression. The police dragged me off the back of the stage, and they ejected me through, you know, some or another exit. Apparently, after I left, the audience called the mayor to account for what was going on with the police bothering the gay community. And apparently, John Lindsay had made a statement that he would permit me to speak if I wanted. Of course, he knew darn well the police had already thrown me out. Didn't realize that I would come back. And I snuck back in. I mean, I broke through the security lines again. I can't tell you how I did it, but I got back in. And I came right down that aisle. And I could see him looking up from the podium at me, you know, biting his lip and saying, oh shit, here he comes again. And I walked right back up on stage and I said to him, I understand you said I can speak. And he said yes, and he yielded the podium to me. And I addressed the audience about the police brutality and the harassment we were facing, and I said my piece. I thanked them, and I left as surreptitiously as I'd entered.
Do you hear the joy in his voice in telling that story? And he almost can't believe that he did that as a young man. It was here in his 1989 when I'm interviewing him, and he did this in 1971, I believe.
Wow.
Or 70 or 71. It was his 21st birthday when this happened. It was Constitution Day. And he loved telling the story because there's such a joyful memory of youthful bravado. He was brave and tough. He got beaten up, on one occasion badly beaten. That only inspired him to fight harder. But at the time I met him in the late 80s, he was concerned that no one would ever remember what he did and what his contributions were. So one of the joys for me in sharing the story, and I should say, these are all Jewish troublemakers that I'm sharing with you. And I think of them as Jewish troublemakers in the best sense of the word, that they come out of a tradition, the same tradition we do, of social justice and the importance of doing what's right. And Morty, I didn't know it at the time I was interviewing him. I suspected so. He already had AIDS at the time I interviewed him. And he died in 1992, a young man in his early 40s. He's one of my heroes, and when I have doubts about my ability to push forward on something, I think, well, if Morty could do what he did in front of 1,000 people, you know, I can get up in the morning during the middle of a pandemic and get my day underway. And he sets that's a wonderful example. And he's somebody I relate to in particular because he's from Queens, which is where I'm from. He's a Jew, very familiar kind of person. He and his mom and my mom co-founded PFLAG Queens.
That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I love that connection. So I have two more people to share with you. So let's move on to Paulette Goodman. Paulette Goodman was president of PFLAG in the late 1980s when I interviewed her. She has a unique experience in that she grew up she was born in Paris and lived through World War II in Paris. Remarkably, her family, most of her family survived. And this is Paulette talking about the experience of her experience of growing up and what happened. So let's hear what she has to say.
The next day, my aunt went and heard what happened, and I don't know why she didn't bring the little boy home. Maybe the concierge wouldn't give him to her. But then my mother sent my sister Gabby to pick up Andre, and as they were walking back towards where in our neighborhood, they were followed by the police and the Gestapo. They followed her to our apartment, and she came up with the two French policemen. The Gestapo stayed downstairs, and they told Mrs. Rosenberg, Madame Rosenberg, you will have to let this little boy go with us because his mother is asking for him. And my mother says, if my daughter did not take the child yesterday, that means she doesn't want him to be there. And I have brought up 9 children, and I can bring up a 10th. Please leave me my grandchild. This was her first grandchild. She tore her hair out. She made such a scene. And we were there in the kitchen when that happened, and I remember everything that happened. And they said, look, you better quiet down, and you better let the child go, because if you don't, there are those 2 Gestapo downstairs. They'll come up and they'll take all of you with all the children. So they had no choice. They took my nephew, and he was reunited with my sister. And I think they spent several months in Drancy, which was a camp right outside of Paris. And we did get a couple of letters, threw the letters over the wall. We even sent some packages, whatever my mother could get her hold of, to, some food in that camp. And then we knew they were sent to Auschwitz, and we never heard from them again. So that's the background. Now, I know what it's like to be in the closet. I know what it's like to be a minority, to be threatened. I lost most of our family, except for my immediate brothers and sisters. One, my older sister, never came back, but aunts and uncles, cousins, people whom I never knew, who lived in Poland, were all exterminated.
So what Paulette's story says to me is that she took her experience and brought that to bear on her work with PFLAG. One challenge for her was that her child wasn't so keen on her being an activist, her gay child. And when I interviewed her, she said, you notice I never say if my gay child is my daughter or my son. She said, because I've agreed not to identify my child. But Paulette was relentless. She got a letter to the first President Bush's wife asking for words of support. This was at a time when, before there was any support at all, spoken support from the White House. She found a way to get that letter to Barbara Bush and got a response. And then somehow that response was slipped to the Associated Press. Can't imagine how that happened. But there were words of support for parents of gay people. So there are, I like to think that the best use of adversity is to make us stronger, that's what resilience is. I have one more clip to share with you. It's very short. This is with Joyce Hunter. Joyce was born to a 16-year-old Orthodox Jewish mother and an African-American father, unmarried. You can imagine how thrilled her parents and his parents were. It was not a good thing. She spent most of her growing up in foster homes. She was sent to a psychiatrist because they thought she was gay. She was told if she got married and had children, she wouldn't be gay anymore. She tried to kill herself a couple of times. She was badly gay bashed in her 20s. It's a long story, but she wound up being sent back to high school to get her GED, got her undergraduate degree, got her master's degree, became a social worker, got her PhD, and was one of the first employees of what's come to be known as HMI, or the Hedrick Martin Institute for the Protection of Lesbian and Gay Youth, and was the co-founder of the Harvey Milk High School, the first high school for at-risk LGBTQ young people. And that is a picture of Joyce from years ago. She's now in her early 80s, is married to her partner of more than 30 years, and is one of the few people still alive who I interviewed. And she is a living example of resilience. And here this is just a very short clip of her talking about how anger motivated her, how she used anger. And I'll speak briefly at the end of this about anger, what motivated people in the movement. But let's hear it from Joyce first.
One of the things that the movement did for me, it gave me a vehicle to express my anger.
What were you angry about?
Everything. That I had been denied my life, that I had no adolescence. My childhood was robbed. I always say that when I come back in the next life, I want to come out at 2, and I want to be able to enjoy being who I am.
And you can hear the joy in her voice at being who she is. She made up for the experience, all the experiences that she had, and took what she had lived through and used it to help generations of young people to have better lives. And certainly a lot of the people she's worked with, a lot of the young people come from particularly challenging circumstances. One of the things I learned in interviewing people for my book was that they were motivated principally by 2 emotions. One was love, and the other was anger. Anger at what was done to people, anger as Joyce experienced of being beaten up and being denied her life, but also love and the search for love. So many people got into the movement because they were looking to meet other people like themselves. When I asked Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin, who co-founded the Daughters of Bilitis in 1955, and Phyllis just died a few weeks ago at age 95, when I asked them why they started the Daughters of Bilitis, thinking they were planning a big national movement, Del Martin said, "We just wanted to meet some lesbians." And she said it 3 times to me. "We just wanted to meet some lesbians." And Dick Leitch, who wound up leading the famous Sip-In here in New York in 1966, a protest at a gay bar, he came to New York and wanted to he said he wanted to drink cocktails and smoke cigarettes like Betty Davis and have sex with lots of guys. But he wound up being drawn to the movement because the guy he was dating was involved in managing, and the only way he was going to get to spend time with him was if he went to the meetings. So our movement has been driven and energized by anger and by love. So
it's so powerful. And also Keshet's history is also in that as well, that like when Keshet was started, a lot of it was, we just want to meet other LGBTQ Jews. Like, we just want to have Shabbat together. We just want to have a Hanukkah party. Like, I want to meet someone, that's part of our history as well. And so really building community is like the first step to building the movement.
Absolutely. That's a great slogan if you don't use that one already.
That is great, Emily. Good job.
Thank you. You're welcome. Well, wow. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing all of those wonderful clips and doing all the incredible work to archive and save these stories and publish these stories for those of us to experience. Dubs, do you want to share a final question? We do our closing.
We still have so many things to talk about.
I know, we're so excited.
Our final question before we move into our closing segment is, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope in a way is that it's easier to have hope than not to. You know, that I can catastrophize and think bad things are going to happen, but I can also look back in history and see that often out of crisis, out of adversity, comes good things, often unexpected. I know out of the experience of our people, out of the Holocaust, it's often verboten to talk about silver lining given the enormity of what happened. But that even people who went through that experience had lives. They built lives. They found love again. They had children. They were often deeply wounded, often terribly damaged, yet they went on with their lives. And I think the example for all of us is to continue with our lives as best we can. And in an ideal world, leave the world, and it's such a cliche to say it, but leave the world a better place than we found it, even if it's by helping one person, which is also part of our tradition.
Right.
So I do have hope, even if I wake up in the morning sometimes and I think, oh my God. But I do have hope.
Thank you so much for that. So something that we're doing with our interviewees is in our closing segment, we are doing a silly little quick fire series of questions. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and first thing that pops into your head, and
that could be dangerous.
Whatever you feel comfortable. I know, right? Well, we have editing capacity as well. So, you ready?
Yeah. Ready.
Right, okay. First is, what is your favorite food?
Guacamole is the thing that comes to mind first, but that's not Jewish.
That's okay.
It's okay. Also, you know what? There's so many different types of Jewish food, you know, like from different parts of the world.
It's
you know?
true. Actually, another favorite is cream cheese on matzah, but I just don't do it anymore.
That's good. Thank you. Okay, here's another one. What's one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
Oh, have some compassion and just leave me alone. Meaning leave myself alone. You know, I beat myself up over and over again. Just be compassionate. You know, it'll be okay. It'll be okay.
And if you had a pet elephant, what would you name it?
Ellie.
Oh, that's a good one.
Emily, what would you?
Huh?
Trunky.
Emily would name her elephant.
Doves.
Oh God. I never, oh my gosh. Ellie, is that okay?
Ellie is really cute. That's a pretty good answer. And finally, what is a word that makes you feel empowered?
What is a word that makes me feel empowered?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's so funny that you should ask that. The fact that I can see over my shoulder, there's a poster that has the word dyke. And I don't know why I feel empowered by the word dyke and having that poster, but I do.
Yes.
So that makes me feel empowered. I'm sure my therapist would have thoughts on this.
Our therapists have lots of things to say.
I love that.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, Eric, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and your insights. It's just so special. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a privilege for me to be here with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. And thank you for all of you watching or listening. And don't forget to check out our resources, videos, and information about Keshet at www.keshetonline.org. And stay tuned for next week's episode. Take care, everyone.
Yes. Bye.